All right, we'll get started here. It's 10:31, so we've got 30 minutes to get you all trained up on and caught up on performance testing with the FCC. So good morning, everyone. I'm Andy Deinert, and today I'm doing a presentation with Greg from Calix. Maybe go to the next slide there, Greg. We can give our titles there. So I'm the Network and Security Services Manager at Vantage. Greg is the Solutions Marketing Director. So I'm taking the first half of the slide deck, and Greg's going to follow up on the second half here. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat window there or the messages window, and we'll get those answered as soon as we can. We do plan to leave a few minutes at the end for questions and answers. So please do ask if you do have any questions. So with that, we'll get started. So today we're going to be talking about giving you an update just on what's been happening over the last several months from Washington, D.C. That'll be kind of my portion of the presentation, and then Greg's going to kind of walk into the getting ready part of the equation of performance testing. We're going to try and kind of keep this vendor neutral. Both of our companies have solutions, so we're going to try and keep it neutral to our what's going on and what steps you should be doing now to prepare for the testing that's coming up. So performance testing, we'll just kind of recap that real quick. So if you're unfamiliar with it, or you've probably heard it 100 times at some point, if you're just a little fuzzy on what actually needs to happen during the test windows, during those test windows, we are testing both speed and latency to the subscriber home. So that test window is from 6 to midnight, which is actually 1 hour before peak and 1 hour after peak, typically for most networks. And we're doing one speed test per hour, but we're doing latency tests once per minute during that window. So lots of testing going on during that time frame, especially for latency. And then during that test window, or you do that test window 7 times or 7 consecutive days. So call it Monday through Sunday or Sunday through Saturday, whatever you want to do, it doesn't matter as long as it's 7 consecutive days. And you can select any time during the quarter to do that testing as well. So you have to do the testing once a quarter and 7 consecutive days, and from 6 to midnight during those 7 consecutive days. The results that you get from that test window do need to be recorded and eventually submitted to USAC so they can evaluate how the network is performing, and then they can give you the thumbs up or thumbs down on how you're doing there. So next slide. So this is probably the biggest change that's happened over the last year or so. The IXP locations has been expanded. If you remember, initially the FCC came out and indicated that they designated 16 locations that you could test to, and they picked these locations across the U.S. This has changed. This is part of the order that has changed the most significantly in the last year. They've revised this to kind of expand based on where connectivity really happens. So where your customer is going to get their data is kind of how they've positioned this. The IXP locations is defined as the top 44 major ASNs that are out there in the U.S. So what does that mean? So it's if you're connecting to one of the larger carriers, like maybe it's a level 3 or a Cogent or one of those types of networks, that's where they want you to test to. And the reason for that is because that's where a lot of the content is sourcing from or going through. So if you have a good connection to one of those larger carriers, your customers are probably having a good experience with the internet and the bandwidth that they have. Now, there's a little bit of a thing that you need to be aware of. You need to be directly connected to one of these top 44 ASNs. You can't be, hanging off off a transport node. You have to be directly connected to a router or switch on one of those networks. So you have to be directly connected to that IXP. And on the next slide, I've got a couple of the examples of who these IXP vendors are or carriers are. I mentioned Level 3 and Cogent, but also Hurricane Electric and Zayo. These are just some of them. This is a sampling, but if you needed a full list, you can look at the FCC's document, and they have an appendix with those listing in there. You can see that I have Level 3 on here twice, so they have two different ASNs, autonomous system numbers. So that's what they're basing this off of, is the autonomous system number ranking is kind of how they chose those top 44. So this does change a little bit, not typically at the top of the list, but sometimes at the bottom of the list there are some ranking changes. So if you're connecting to one of the companies that's on the lower end of that, you may need to keep track of where they're at on the ranking list as well. So, but if you're connecting to one of the top 4 or 5 companies, that's probably not going to change. Yeah, go ahead there, Greg. So the next slide here is kind of the, when do you need to test? And this is dependent on which program you're involved in. So we've got them all listed out here as far as most of the companies probably that are involved in this session today are probably, in the ACAM Revised, ACAM 2, or Legacy. There's probably some of you in the CAF 2 as well, but so for the majority of you, there's probably the testing is going to start January 2021, this coming January, or January of 2022. And we call this the pre-testing start date. So the FCC did adjust this part of the order as well. They're giving you essentially a practice game, so to speak, to do your testing 1 full year before they actually impose fines and you go live. So you get a participation grade essentially that first year. So if you haven't started looking at what solution you're going to use to do your testing, especially if you need to start testing in January, you need to start doing that now. And even if you have testing that starts in January of 2022, it doesn't hurt to start that testing now as well. Probably start talking to friendlies within your network, employees in your network to see how the testing would work with the solution that you select. So I'm not going to go through every one of these lines here for just the lack of time that we have here today, but you can see if you're participate in one of these programs, you can see the corresponding pre-testing start date and the actual testing start date. All right. The quantity of required test locations, it depends on how many active subscribers that you have in the program that you participate in. If you have over 500 active locations, you'll test 50 locations for the FCC. And how that works is it's supposed to be 10% of the active locations you have, but there's an upper bound and there's a lower bound as well. So if you have less than 50 active locations, you would have 5 locations you need to test at. If you're somewhere between 51 and 500, you'll do 10%. But if you're over 500 active locations, the max would be 50 locations. And this is applied to, if you're in multiple programs, this does apply to each program and speed tiers. So if you're in ACAM and ACAM 2, if your company participates in 2 different programs, you would have to possibly test 50 locations in each program. So keep that in mind as well. Okay, next slide. And then the reporting and certification. The pre-testing reporting will need to be done 1 month from the end of the quarter or after the quarter ends. So if your testing starts in January of 2021, April, you would have to do your reporting for that quarter. So they want to see that information coming into their portal right after the quarter ends. And then the reporting frequency when the real testing starts is once a year, so annually to meet the requirements. If you're not meeting those requirements, their reporting does increase to quarterly. And then again, all the test data needs to be submitted, and then you're giving them kind of the raw data as well. You're not doing the calculated speed. You're actually giving them the amount of megabits that's went through the network, that sort of thing. So you're not, from the start time to the end time, you're not doing that calculation. The USAC will be doing that for you. And obviously, if you're not meeting the requirements, USAC will be doing that auditing and informing you if you're not meeting the requirement. So, okay, next slide. And it's great.
Alrighty. Thank you, Andy, for all that detail. Can you hear me okay, Andy?
Yeah. Yep.
Good. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about over the next 10 minutes is exactly what you need to do to get ready between now and January 1st. And the best place to look is talk to some of the people who have currently done testing in 2020. As Andy said, the price cap carriers, it's about a dozen of them, have started to get involved. And there's a few different lessons learned from that experience. Calix was very involved with that, work with several carriers. The first thing is around the subscriber recruitment. The way it works is that USAC is going to provide you a list, a random list of locations who need to be recruited. You don't pick them, they pick them, but you need to recruit those. And so it's going to be very important to build that value proposition. I'll get into that a little bit more detail in a second. Second area is hiding the complexity. You don't have time. You don't have time to deal with the complexity. You need to have a solution where it's minimized to recruiting those subscribers, putting those subscribers into the system, selecting that test server, as Andy talked about, matching it to right ASN, but you want all the details of the testing, everything from how many times you test an hour, how many, how do you do latency testing, that type of thing. You want to move that to the background. And as well as the report, there's a lot of data coming together. I mean, imagine you're testing latency once a minute for 6 hours for 7 days each quarter. It's a lot of data. You want systems that are going to provide you the ability to format those reports, and for you to be able to review it quickly, make that decision, you're willing to send it to USAC, you're ready. And the last thing is around the flexibility of the solution. This order was published back in July 2018. A little over 2 years afterwards, we've had 2 sets of changes coming in. So you need to make sure whatever solution you have can adapt to those changes very quickly. I'm going to tell a story in a second about change that came after the testing started in 2020 and how we as a community adapted to that work by both the USAC as well as the FCC. So let's get into the details. Let's talk a little bit about recruitment and what you need to do. So your biggest concern is probably going to be around the privacy of personal data. Imagine the conversation you're going to have. You get this list from USAC, you make some phone calls, and you say, hey, I got this brand new program. We are going to put a solution within your home, and we're going to collect data, and we're going to give it to the federal government. So already, there's fears of, well, what data? What do you mean you're going to share with the government? Address it in this way. We need to educate this consumer, and FCC also has a website to help us with this, that this testing is no different than the routine performance testing that we're doing day in and day out. The whole purpose of this testing is to provide a better subscriber experience for you, the subscriber, and you have the opportunity to be part of that. So if there are any issues, and I don't believe there will be, but if there are any issues, we're going to find it very quickly. We're going to make these changes, and we're going to provide you what you pay for. Now, the order also provides you the opportunity to provide enticements. You may take 5%, 10%. It doesn't really specifically say what type of enticements, but they say that is always an option. Now, as a backup, the USAC will always give you more random list of locations should you go through and not able to recruit one, or someone moves, you have to recruit somebody different. Here's the best news, is you only have to do it every 2 years. So it's going to be a bit of a headache, but it's something that you need to start thinking about as soon as possible. Let's go to the second issue that we saw, complexity. How do you hide the complexity of these tests? The 3-part step, or the 3-step parts of doing these tests are, you're very involved in the first one. You do need to get involved with setting it up. You need to provide those 50 subscribers into your back office systems. You need to pair it up with a server. You need to go through the motions that Andy talked about of looking at your middle mile and determine whether or not that middle mile touches the different prioritized ASNs, the 44 prioritized ASNs. You need a solution that can automatically discover those service providers, or should I say those test servers, and be able to make it very easy to make that selection. Getting over that rough part, once you go to the execution, a lot of that is baked into a lot of the solutions. The knowledge to know that you test speed once an hour for 6 hours a week, or 6 hours a day, 7 days a week, or per quarter, or latency once a minute, 6 hours, 7 days a week, or the ability or the necessity to retry your test every minute should your network be busy. All those things should be removed from you one step, and have the hardware and the software take care of that for you. You don't need to be involved with that, and if you were, then it's going to be a much different animal. Last thing is, a lot of data needs to come together as part of the execution and ready to build those reports at the end of the quarter, during the pre-test, or 6 months later after the year for the regular test. But you're going to need a solution that pulls together the data. The last thing you want to do during the pre-test is scrambling with all this data and all these files and spreadsheets and pulling them all together to meet that deadline. And that deadline is part of the compliancy audit. So you're going to have to make sure you can move very quickly. Last thing is around flexibility. Now, flexibility is across these 3 parts of the solution. We have the test controller, which sets up the test itself, initiates the test, collects the data, and builds the reports. We have the clients that communicates to the servers, that measures the latency, measures the speeds necessary to collect that data and be able to roll it up in the reports. Here's what happened in January 2020. And
oh, Greg, we lost your audio. Greg, you're unmuted now, but we can't hear you. Well, if there's any questions while Greg's figuring out his technical difficulties, go ahead and put them in the chat, and I can answer those while he's trying to come back online here, possibly. Are you there, Greg?
Yep. Can you hear me now?
Now I can. Yep.
Okay, great. Alrighty. Where did we leave off? Was that on this slide or a slide before?
Yep. Yep. You're on this slide. Yep.
Okay, great. Well, this is my last slide, so that's good news. So we're going to have time to get into questions in a second. So what I really want to talk about here is the flexibility and tell a story about January 2020. The testing had started. You had a handful of service providers. The USAC had just published their report guidelines, and we needed to work together very quickly as an industry to pull together and work with this new guidelines and very quickly get these solutions out there. And showing that working with software solutions, you're able to make those changes and get them downloaded to the systems to make it work. I would say 2020 was definitely a success. The whole purpose of the pre-test is to work through these types of things, to mature the solutions. And we are in a very good place as an industry across the board moving forward as we're wrapping up the last 2 months of the first year of testing. January 1st, 2021, we're going to go from a dozen service providers to probably 300 or 400 service providers as we start coming into the ACAM 1 and ACAM 1 revised. So we're likely going to see perhaps some changes necessary, probably to make the order better. But again, having that flexibility within our solutions is going to be really key moving forward. The last thing wrapping up, and then we'll go to questions. There were 2 waivers that occurred in 2020. One was around the number of subscribers. It was understood pretty early that we didn't want technicians out there to working directly with the subscribers during the pandemic. So the FCC said that, you know, if you can't get the full amount, that's fine. And then there was a waiver around the getting the information into the report necessary to meet the new specification from USAC. USAC does have some training planned for the November-December timeframe. The exact date has not been published. Look for notices from, I'm sure, Annie's company or my company. We'll get that information out there as soon as we can, as soon as we find out, or continue to get queued in with the FCC and USAC on that. I understand it's going to be very valuable testing. Going to questions.
So Greg, Mike had a question about covering the number of tests. Is it by speed tier? Do you want to take that one?
Oh, sure. If we go back to your original slide, Andy, when you talked about the number of subscribers that need to be tested, it's by state and by speed tier. So if you're in a particular state, let's take a typical ACAM. If you're in a particular state and you have a 10.1 and a 25.3, you need 2 sets of test pools. If you're in a second state, you have those 2, then you'll need 4. So that's the way it works. Thanks, Mike, for that question.
Yep.
All righty, any other questions?
Greg, a question I normally get is if a company it goes out and tries to install the equipment or tries to start the testing with a customer, do they need to get any waiver or any documentation from that customer saying they're doing that testing in that home? Normally, it kind of depends on the situation, but our recommendation from Vantage Point is making sure you have some sort of language in the subscriber service agreement that testing can be done. So it's in the, it's something that you can do. So you're not doing it blindly to the customer. So you have a kind of a way to put that in front of them that you do reserve the right to do testing on the network. So we do recommend being transparent and having that in place with the end customers.
A question I get a lot is that what if you've created services that are different than the actual funded rate? So let's say the FCC requires you to do 25 megabits per second down, 3 up, but you've built a network out that you can do 50 megabits down and 10 up. You do not have to test the 50. You only test the funded rate, but if that 50 megabits per second service is within the area of 25, you can collect that data and you can use that data as part of it. Now, the second part of that question is, well, what if I provided someone 10 meg down, 1 meg up in that 25 megabits per second area? There, you're going to be tested against the 25. So you would need to be in a position to upgrade that. The FCC, that was fine with the new order, but you would have to upgrade them for the testing necessary.
Correct. Yep. So we got a question from Glenn here. Has any of the testing prompted any security concerns from the end user, Big Brother? Oh yes, I haven't seen it specifically myself, but that's been a common concern from the beginning when this was rolled out. There will be a lot of subscribers that are not interested in anybody looking at their pipe any more than what is being done today. So yes, there definitely is going to be concerns. You know, again, it's kind of educating, like Greg said, educating that subscriber of what's being done. And it's kind of normal testing like we always do in monitoring and testing the network today. And it's really just verifying that they're getting the speeds that they should be getting based on the speed tiers that the companies are getting support for.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the irony is that the type of testing that's being done is, and the type of data that's being collected is really no different than, you know, than a speed test, and you know, that's happening every day in every network around the world. So,
Right.
Although we can't minimize that concern or fear.
Well, we have a couple more minutes, so if there's any more questions, feel free to jump in there and type them in, or I think Jenny said you can also share your audio and video if you would like to ask it live.
Okay.
So we have a question from Thomas. Average costs, probably something that you should just reach out to Calix and myself at Vantage Point directly for. Probably don't want to get into those weeds here in this session, but we would certainly probably take those questions offline with you there, Thomas. Toby's got a question. So are combo CAF nodes going to be part of test or only out of main central offices? So the question there, it sounds like, can remote nodes, if I understand that, CAF nodes, basically any location that you're reporting that's you are serving through the hub portal is eligible, right? So you report where you can provide service in the hub portal, but that's taking a step further of where is active services being deployed today. So if that helps out with that question, if an active subscriber that's receiving funding off of a CAF node in your question, that location could possibly be a test location. Again, USAC is the one that does the random selection of where the testing happens, and they don't have any idea whether they're off of a remote node or a central office shelf. They have no idea. They just know based on what you're reporting in the hub portal.
Okay. If you look at your panel, Jean has provided a link for the next session that starts in less than a minute. I'm happy to squeeze another question in, but I think we're wrapping up in a second here. It is the top of the hour, East Coast time, and I believe we need to move to the next session.
All right. Well, Greg, it was great doing this session with you. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. And thank you, everybody, for your great questions and your time.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Have a great week.